Welcome to my stream. Today I'll be teaching you dynamic UMG systems in our engine. Basically what that means is we're going to have a bunch of actors in a scene. I'm listening to my own stream. Hang on. Okay, so basically we're going to have a bunch of actors in a scene, and you're going to have a UMG that will have information about those actors in the scene. You will have a function on those actors that you will update accordingly by buttons created by the UMG, but it's all dynamically. So it's not hard-coded, so you can have 10 actors in the scene or 5, and it will automatically create that UMG for you on runtime. So let's get started. If I teach too fast, feel free to tell me. I'm going to make a new folder called Widgets. I'm going to make a new folder called Blueprints and Materials. So let's hop into the widgets and go all the way to the bottom, make a new widget blueprint and call it widget blueprint main widgets. So in here, we're going to have the core logic of our UMG. So that's just an empty widget as it always is. Now go ahead and create another one. And we're just going to do that button widget. And feel free to make another one that is information widget. So you should have 3 widgets. So let's open all of them and save them. All right. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them in chat. I'll answer them at the end of the stream. So now we have that. We're going to make a blueprint just to have everything at start ready, so we don't have to go back and make another blueprint. So let's create a right-click here, make a blueprint class, and select an actor. BP cube actor, or whatever you want to call it. It's all fine. So next, we're going to make a struct, and you can do that by right-clicking, go to Blueprints, and a structure. Now, a structure basically is, you can see it as a variable that contains a lot of other variables. So let's call it information struct. Now, if you open that, you're going to see this. And that's just, basically you can add variables to this. So let's add a few variables to this. Bbool, so that's just a random boolean we have. Cube name. Let's add a few things in here. We can have a float, a value. We can have a description, which is also a string. We can have an integer, so integer. Now, that's basically going to be a variable which has a boolean, a string, a float, another string, and integer. And based on this, we're going to give that information to an actor. And in our UMG, we're going to get all the actors that are in the scene and display information that is that information. So now if you just close that, that's all you have to do. And go to cube actor. On the left, you create a new variable. And you just call it info. And on the right side, or wherever your details panel is, you can go to variable type and type in information struct. Now if you compile and save, you can see the default value here. You have a boolean, you have a name, a value, a description, and an integer, right? So how about we add a cube to the scene? Just a cube, so we can later on change the colors of those cubes. So let's just keep it at this. Now if you place this in a scene, let's place 4 of them. You can't really change the values, so if you go into the cube again and you click on this eye icon, if you compile save, you can actually see this information in the level, which is per instance. So if you change it here, it's not actually going to change it on this one. So let's just enter some random names. Random second name, Celeste, and Lewis. All right. Let's give it a random number in there. That's the same number. Same to do description. Let's just do lorem ipsum lorem. Hello there, and hello world. And again, we're just going to have a random number. All right. Now you have 3 actors in the scene, 4 actors in the scene, and I'll have individual information about them. Now next, what we're going to do is we're going to create a material. So let's create a material. Material master color. All right. So let's create a vector parameter. Now that's just basically a vector and it's a parameter, so you're going to be able to change it. So let's call that color. All right, that's all we need right now. But we're going to apply that to this cube. So just drag it on there so it's yellow. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to make a function. We're going to do switch colors. And we're going to also add a boolean. So b is set. And we're going to default that to false. So if that's to true, just do false. It doesn't make a big difference, but just set it to false for now. And then on switch colors, we're just going to get this variable. So I hold control and just drag in here. We're going to not, which is just going to not equal. Just going to not, which is going to invert that boolean. And then we're going to set it. So if it was false, then it's now going to be true. If it was true, then it's now going to be false. So now we have a boolean, right? But we want to change the color of the cube material based on the boolean. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the event graph on begin play. We're going to drag this cube variable in the graph. We do create dynamic material instance. So what that's going to do is going to create a dynamic material instance, as it says, which is a material instance that you can change the color on or whatever parameter you have in the material. So now let's just select the same color, master color we just made. And from the return value, you're just going to call promote the variable and call it dynmat. So then you have a reference to this dynamic material at all times in this actor. So now what we can do is in this switch colors, we can do set vector parameter value. So that's going to set the vector parameter value, which is color. So let's name it color of this dynamic material instance that we just made at begin play. Now that is black. So let's do a select node. And that's a really nifty node for not having to have multiple code lines, because you could do this. You can copy it and then individually change the color to what you like, but then you have duplicate code, and I don't like duplicate code. So we're just gonna make it a select node. So basically, if it's set is true, then it's gonna select this color. If it's not, it's gonna select that color. So on true, I'm just gonna do orange. That's green, not orange. And this one, we're gonna make it pink. So now, let's just call it return node. That's not really needed, but I prefer that because it looks cleaner. So I also like it to have very tidy. It annoys me if it's not tidy. All right, so now we have a function which basically lets you switch a color, which is something really simple, but you will see how it works later. So additionally, where is my content browser? Let's just make a blueprint class of a player controller. So BP player controller, and also one of a game mode. Now let's open both of them. And on the game mode, I'm going to do something which is reparenting. So just go to File and click Reparent. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to not make it a game mode base, but a game mode. I've noticed that game mode base sometimes give issues, so I just keep it on game mode. But since 4.14, I think it defaults to game mode base. So let's go to the BP player controller. And in here, just to on event being play, create widget of the main widget only and add it to the viewport. That's all we need to do here. That we don't need to do anything else. So on the PP game mode instead, on the right side, you can set your player controller to the one we just created. Hit compile save. All right. No, all my windows closed. That's not nice. Please don't do that. Okay. So now this map is untitled, so let's just click save and do test map. Now on the right side, you have to in the world settings. If you don't have this tab, you have to go to window and click on world settings. So then just set it to the BP game mode. Now it's possible that it won't use the BP player controller and the BP game mode yet. Sometimes in the engine, if you change the game mode, you have to wait until you reboot in order for that to have an effect. So it's important to know that. So once that's done, I'm going to click play. And we can see it's using the BP game mode and the BP player controller. So that's working perfectly. Now I'm also actually going to do set input mode UI only because I don't want to be able to move my screen around. Okay, that's not doing it because it doesn't have a player controller. So now you can see I can't move my screen at all. But let's just move you a bit backwards so I can see all 4 blocks. Perfect. So now let's just save all just to be sure. So now we did the core setup of what we're going to do. So now we're going to do some preparation work. Make you a bit larger here. We're going to have a vertical box. Just going to put it on the left side of the screen and put the anchor to left side. The offset bottom is 0. Now I'm going to add a border to that and change the brush color to something transparent, darkish, just so we can read the text that's on it later. Then if you click play, you should see that there is on the left-hand side a darkish border because we just added that to the widgets we spawn on begin play. Okay. So now on the right-hand side of the screen, we're going to do the same. Let's just copy paste this. No, not that. Go back in there. And we're just going to set the anchors to the right side and put the offset to -375 because that's the width of the actual box. Then this border is going to fill again. So now if you press play, there's the border on each side of the screen. Now on its own, that's not doing a lot. That's just showing a border. So we're going to go into the main widget and we want to fill this with information. So let's add a vertical box to that as well to the other border. All right. And we're going to add text to this one. I'm going to make it light because it looks prettier. Information. And in this one, we're going to add buttons. And let's add padding just so it looks a bit prettier and doesn't entirely get stuck in the side of the screen. There you go. So that's that. Now, in the graph, you only need the event construct here. So on event construct, what we're going to do is we're going to get all the actors of class. Now, hang on, sorry. Now, in a world scenario, you don't actually going to use get all actors of class. You're going to use some other form of array you have. So let's just get the BP cube actor, which is going to output all cube actors currently in the scene. So that's those four. And we're going to promote this to a variable, which is going to be the cube array. That's a raw array. There we go. Now, based on that, we're going to do three things. No, two things. Sorry, can't count. Yeah, two things. So we're going to get this cube array. I'm going to loop. Actually, do I want to? Ah, doesn't matter. I'll figure it out later. So from this cube array, we know that we have 4 items in here. But because there might also be 5, we're going to loop it and not do a for loop, which is this one. Because this has a static amount of items it loops. You can also do length -1, which will kind of do the same, but you just also still have to do get. But I prefer to just do it this way because this way it will loop no matter what. So we're going to do a create widget. Now let's start with the information, right? So we know that this box, with no padding on the actual vertical box, please, is 375 units wide. So in the information widget, we're just going to delete this canvas panel because we don't need it. A lot of people keep the canvas panel even though you don't need it, so just delete it. And then we're going to add a size box. And on the right side, let's do width override of 350. We don't need to override the height. But then as you can see, it looks still big on screen, right? So let's just do a custom on screen of 350. No, that's height. 375. So now the size box is 375 and it's the size it will be on screen. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add a border again. And let's give it a color too, so it looks, so you can differentiate it. All right. Now, if I don't add a padding to the bottom, then all of the items are going to list next to each other. So let's just keep it so I can show you that later, why we should add a padding. So now we have a border. And what did we have from information? Let's go to content browser, blueprints, information struct. We have a boolean, a string, a value, a description, and an integer. So with that information, we are going to add a vertical box to this border with no padding. And let's add text. Let's make it a bit smaller, 18. Let's add another text, another. So we see that it is not large enough, so let's just increase the size of this, 150, 125, 135. Let's keep it at 140. There we go. And let's put it to light because it looks prettier. And let's make these ones that are in the middle of the two a bit darker so they're easier to read. All right, and this is going to be Boolean, and this is going to be cube name. This is going to be the value. This is going to be the description, and this is going to be an integer. All right. Now let's also give them the actual name so it's easier to differentiate them in code. Cube name, value, description, and integer. Now, are they all variables? Okay. Now, if you go to the main widget, you see we're adding a widget. So if you go to the main widget, go to the event graph after construct, we're going to do the information widget. Now, on its own, that's not automatically going to add it to this vertical box, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to make this vertical box a variable. I'm going to call it information box. And the other one we're going to call the button box. And we're also going to make that a variable by clicking on this variable. All right. So now we have these two actually as a variable. So now we can do all sorts of things with this. So we're going to do add child to vertical box. There we go. Now if you click play, as you see, it actually is listing 5 of them. But as you can see, it's also all close to each other. So that's what I was saying with the bottom. Oh, did I crash the engine? No, I didn't. It looked like I did. That is what I meant with the bottom. So you can see that there is actually a line in between them. So it's easier to differentiate them. All right. So now that's really easy to do, but it still doesn't have any actual values from what the actual boxes have. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the graph, just delete all of this. We're going to add a variable, which is going to be the info. And on the right side on details panel, we're going to change it to the information struct. Now, if you click instance editable and expose and spawn, you go to the main widget, it actually becomes a pin. So you can feed in whatever info you have. So we know that this cube has info as well. So we're going to get the info and we're going to feed that in there. Straighten that. So click on play. It still doesn't change anything because we actually haven't connected what's in this info to what's listed in here. So if you click on cube name, you can actually bind that to the cube name automatically. You don't actually have to make a bind function, but for the Boolean value and integer, you have to. So if you click on bind and you go over info, you don't actually have either of those for the Boolean. So just click create binding. And that's going to create a actually function for you. And we have this information variable. So what you can do is you can just split the structure pin, which is just going to give the variable with its own variables. And you can drag this to a Boolean, add to the text, and it's going to automatically convert that to a text. And we're going to do the same for the value. So create binding, get the info, split the structure pin, make it all neat, go to the integer and do the same. There we go. So now if you press play, you can see it actually is getting all the values from the boxes, which is really useful if you ever need that. So let's say you have an array of inventory items and you know the item ID, then you can look up in the data table what the item values are, and then you can display it, which is really, really useful. And you have a lot more possibilities with this. You can also show textures. You can do anything you want with it. As long as you pass the information to the widget you're creating, you can show anything you want. You can make an entire other widget in it. It's whatever you want to do. So now, when that's done, we also need to have one for the buttons that we're going to make because we made a function in the cube actor that switches colors, right? So now we're going to do create widget. And we're going to make that the button widget. And from the button box that we made a variable from on the right side. So if you didn't do that yet, go to the button box and click on this variable and call it the button box. And we're going to do add child to vertical box. Now, as before, there's nothing in there, so if you press play, you don't actually see anything. So let's just get rid of the canvas panel again because we don't need it. And let's add a size box again. Again, with the override of 375. Then on the right top side, customize screen 375. So in here, we're just going to add a button and text on the button. We don't need anything else. Let's make this button fancy pink. And again, let's add padding just so we don't see it's all stick together. And in here, this is going to be the cube name, just so we can differentiate them as well. So cube name, and again, we're just going to create an information variable. So we're at left side, information, then call it the information struct. Instance editable, expose on spawn. Important that you do that. All right. So again, we're just going to get the information from it. And we're going to bind this to the cube name. So if you press play, you have a button for all of those boxes that you just made. And you can know which one they are by giving them a name in the information struct. Now, you don't have to make an information struct for it. You can also just perfectly, where is it? In the main widget. You can also just do get set and use that as an input pin. But I prefer to make everything in a struct so that it's all together and easy to work with. Now, on its own, if you click this button, it doesn't do anything because we haven't actually connected that to anything. Now, on this part of the tutorial, it's important to note that a lot of people go into the button widget and they make a variable, which is a variable to the main widget, which then they call an event that they made here. So call me. Then in the button widget, once they press on the button, which you can click on the button and go on the right side on Details panel, click on Collect. Then you would call that reference to the main widget and call that function, which is a bad way of doing it. So now, what we want to do is we want to create an event dispatcher. Now, an event dispatcher, for those who don't know what that is, you can kind of look at it as a newsletter. So the button called is a newsletter, and you're going to allow other actors to subscribe to that. So I'll go further on how exactly I mean that by first making something else. So if you have the button called selected, on the right hand side on details again, make a new input, and that input is going to be an index. That's index with an EX. So now, if we type it in here, you can do call. Now you have an index, but I actually haven't given this button an index yet. And I'll show you why we need that index in just a second. So how can you call this event dispatcher we just made? Because if you have this button widget, you have a reference to it. So you do, what did I call it? Button called? You can't actually cast it out, so you have to do assign button called. Now what's that going to do is, it's basically telling to register this event, which is just an event you created automatically, because if you do bind, you can also do create event. No, you can do a custom event and connect it up, which doesn't work because it doesn't have the correct inputs. So basically what you're telling is every time you create this, also automatically subscribe to this newsletter. So whenever this is called, it's basically sending out a newsletter to everyone that subscribes to it. And basically any actor can subscribe to it as long as they have some form of reference to each other. So let's just do button is called. Let's do a print string because print strings are useful. If I click this, you see on the left hand side of the screen, you see it's printing hello. Now, if I were to not do that, and I wouldn't actually subscribe to that, then it's not going to print. So now we have subscribed to this newsletter or event dispatcher, how you call it. You also have this index. Now, why do we need that index? Because you have the names of it, right? But that on its own is not enough information to know which box it is, right? I mean, technically, what you can do is you can loop over it and you can do get info and you can break it and you can get this cube name and you can check if it's equal to whatever you put here as an input. But that's a bad way of doing it because if we already supply what index of the array this button is, then we can just call that thing, call the exact cube. So let's just make a variable out of this. I promote a variable, index, instance editable, expose and spawn. All right. And now you can see in the main widget, it also has an index. So if we just connect this up, then we know that this first button is index 0, the second one is index 1, the third one, the second one is index 1, and the third one is index 2, and so forth. Because it's 0 based, it's not 1 based. So now if you print this index, which is supplied by this variable, which is exposed and spawn, then if you press play, you click it, it's actually going to print the number of the index of the array. So now we know that this index is the correct one. So now if you go to the cube array, you just get it, and you get the sorry, if you just get the index of which we used to spawn it, then you can do switch colors. So now, if you remember from the start, we made a function switch colors that's gonna invert is set and then make a select node to color this. Then now it should technically change color. So now if I click this, it's gonna flip between pink and green. Click this one, it's gonna change this one. If I click this one, it's gonna change that one. If I click this one, it's gonna change that one. Which is a really simple way of doing it. Now, that on its own is a useful way of actually letting something happen. So you don't have to use that for changing a color. You can use that for whatever you want. For example, changing something in a player character. It's basically whatever you want. Now, aside from that, I'm going to do one more thing in the information widget. I'm going to add a boolean, another bool, another bool. Hang on. And we're just going to increase this again, 170, 175. There we go. And let's just copy this. Which this is a useful way of actually just making sure you copy the correct color. You just drag it in here, which is just going to save it as a color picker. So you just can click here and it's automatically that color. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to bind this again, but we're going to bind it to something else. So we're going to create a new variable, which is the cube actor. Instance editable, expose and spawn. And in the main widgets, we're just going to give in the reference from the array element. So we know that that is the correct cube. Now from the cube actor, we have this variable that is called bIsSet. So if we get isSet and we bind that to the text, and we click compile save, then it's going to change when you change something to that actor. Because you have a reference to the actual actor, you know what the values are. Whenever it changes, then it's going to change here as well. Because you bind it to it. There you go. And that's how you create a dynamic UMG. So now I'm going to go over to some questions. There are questions. Lewis asked, how did you align those blueprint nodes? Well, I'm not sure which one you mean, because that's been some time, I think, since you asked that, because it's the first question I read. But I'm assuming you mean that they are aligned properly the same way on one side. So what you do is you just select those two, or three, or whatever you want. You right-click it, and on alignment, you just do align right. Then it's going to align it to the exact spot on the right side, which is really useful. Featherfall 101 asked, could you still use a select node if you wanted more than two colors? Yes, you can. So the select node doesn't only work on booleans, it also works on integers and enums. So where is this select node, right? So let's do a select, right? And let's make a variable is an integer. That's a float. And we're going to connect this to the index. And we're going to connect this to the value. So it becomes the actual one that we want. So now if you right click this and you do add option pin, no, not break links, add option pin, you can add more and more until you want. So basically, if this integer is 0, then it's going to output this. If it's 1, then it's going to output this. If it's 2, output that. If it's 3, output that. If it's 4, output that. So again, with the alignment, just select the ones you want to align, alignment, right? And then they're aligned. Celeste, how long have you been preparing for this stream? I have done basically nothing. This is my day job. I make this a few times a week, so I'm very used to it. Okay, I know there's some form questions, but I don't think I have them open, so let me just go there. Events. No problem, Federal. Mm. So the best practice for always making HUDs work with mouse, gamepad, and split screen. The engine doesn't actually have gamepad support out of the box as you want it. So if you want to have your game or your project UMG working with gamepad, then you're going to have to actually make your own implementation for it. More questions? Um, go cut, go. I'm really bad with names. I'm sorry. Go Curte, or I have no idea. I can't pronounce that word. Anyway, um, my question is, can I attach this menu directly to VRHTML as a tree widget? Yes, you can. You actually can. So in the cube actor, I'm not sure if it's smart because we're in it, but you can make a widget. Now if you set it to widget class, main widget, and we set it to screen, let's make it world, just to be sure. And 200, no. Let's stick to 500 and 500, but we scale it. Then normally, oh, it's the other way around. Normally it should list that. It's really messy, but it does work. Yes, you can. You can, any widget you make, you can actually attach that to any actor you want. Silicon asks, how hard now would it be to adapt it to the number of boxes on the screen? It's actually not that hard. Can I do it quickly? I think I can. So size Y. So basically you want this information box to scale according to amount of boxes there are, right? So we know that the position X has to be this, position Y has to be that, which is 0, 0. We don't have to change that. Size X is 375. Now you want the size Y to actually change according to how many there are in the scene. So if you go to the graph and on the third pin, we can have a cube array and we can get the length of it. So we know now there's 4 items in this actual array. So I do need to make this editable. Scale boxy? No idea. So then when that's done, we're going to get slot, no, yes, no, canvas. I'm always confused with this. Slot is canvas slot. That's what you need. Then we can do set size. And we know that size X is 375. We know that the information widget, one of them is 175. Now I'm going to calculate that. 175 times 4, that's 700. So if we do 720, because we have some text here, that's 725 probably. Then it's actually going to change that, which is not large enough. How large is it? Anyway, let's do the calculation. So let's do this times the float, 175, plus whatever offset we have. So let's do 35. So you see, now it's actually scaled to the amount of elements in there. So let's delete one. It's only going to be 3. Now there's 5. And just to show that it actually is working, let's add a 80 offset. You see, it extends beneath it, so it works. I think that's mostly it of what I have for today. Yeah, this was the first time that I had to do a community stream. I think it's also the first one. No, I know it's the first one. The second time I say that. But anyway, I had fun